He threw a grenade to frighten her. She kicked it back and said, "Nice try." Veltara Station was not a beautiful place. It was a long, gray metal structure floating between two dead moons, held together by old bolts and older prayers. The lights inside flickered every few hours. The heating system worked only when it wanted to. The food dispensers gave out the same 3 meals on rotation, and one of them tasted like burnt plastic, no matter what setting you chose. But it was a station at the edge of known space, and that made it important. Important enough to staff, important enough to defend. Lieutenant Hana had been stationed there for 7 months. She was 29 years old, born in a small city in South Korea back on Earth, and she had spent the last 11 years in the United Earth Defense Corps. She was not the tallest soldier. She was not the loudest. She did not walk around with her chest out or her jaw set in the way some soldiers did when they wanted people to know they were dangerous. She walked quietly. She spoke only when she had something worth saying. She drank her coffee black, ate her meals fast, and spent her off hours reading old paper books she had carried from Earth in a worn-out canvas bag. The other soldiers on the station liked her, not because she was warm or particularly funny, but because she was steady. In a place as isolated and tense as Veltara, steady was worth more than almost anything else. There were 18 people on the station in total, 12 soldiers, 4 scientists, a station engineer named Doyen, and a medical officer named Rina. Hana was the ranking officer. She ran the morning drills, managed the shift rotations, and filed the weekly reports that got sent back to Earth Command. Reports that usually said the same thing: nothing to report. That changed on a Tuesday. It started with a sound, a low, deep vibration that moved through the walls of the station like a slow heartbeat. Hana felt it before she heard it. She was in the middle of her morning run along the inner corridor when the floor hummed beneath her boots. She stopped, listened. The vibration came again, steady, rhythmic, growing stronger. She was already moving toward the command deck before the alert sounded. Private Tay was at the sensor station, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. He was 22 years old and had been on the station for only 3 months. He was a good soldier, careful, smart, a little nervous in the way young soldiers often were when they first got posted somewhere far from home. "Lieutenant," he said, and his voice was tight. "We have contacts, multiple, coming in fast from the dark side of the second moon." Hana moved to the screen beside him and looked. There were 7 shapes on the sensor display, large, angular, moving in a tight formation with purpose and speed. Not asteroids, not debris, ships. "Identification?" she asked. Tay pulled up the database scan. The computer ran for a few seconds, then returned a result. Hana read it once, then again. Krovan warships. She had heard of the Krovans. Most people in the Defense Corps had, though very few had ever seen them in person. They were an old species, much older than humanity. They had been moving through this region of space for centuries before humans had even managed to leave their own solar system. They were large, bipedal, covered in thick gray-green skin that was hard enough to stop low-caliber rounds. They had 4 fingers on each hand, wide flat faces with small black eyes, and they communicated in a language that sounded like grinding stone. They were also, by every account in the database, extremely aggressive. Not mindlessly aggressive. That was important. They were organized. They had a military structure, a chain of command, a code of conduct of their own. But their first response to encountering a new species or a new installation was almost always the same: a show of force, followed by a demand for surrender or tribute. It had worked on 16 other species before humanity came along. It had worked because every one of those species had at first contact done the logical thing. They had been afraid. Hana opened the station-wide channel. "All personnel, this is Lieutenant Hana. We have incoming Krovan vessels. This is not a drill. Scientists and medical staff report to the inner shelter on Level 3 immediately. Defense personnel, full gear, weapons live, report to your assigned positions in 4 minutes. Move." She closed the channel and looked at Tay. "Keep tracking them. Tell me when they enter docking range." "Yes, Lieutenant." She walked to the weapons locker at the back of the command deck, pulled it open, and began suiting up with the calm efficiency of someone who had done it many times before. Body armor, sidearm, assault rifle, extra magazines. She checked each one without hurrying. Around her, the station came alive. The sound of boots in corridors, the clank of weapons being checked, voices low and controlled. Private Bomi, one of the younger female soldiers, appeared at the door of the command deck. She was 24, athletic, with a sharp face and quick eyes. She had been one of Hana's best soldiers since arriving 6 weeks ago. "They're not responding to our hails," Bomi said. "I know," Hana replied. "So they're just coming in?" "Yes." Bomi was quiet for a second. "What do we do?" Hana finished checking her rifle and looked up. "We hold the station. We protect our people. And we do not show them we are afraid, because if we do, this gets much worse." Bomi nodded once. That was enough. The Krovan ships docked 30 minutes later. There was no warning, no formal request, no communication of any kind. One moment the docking bay doors were sealed, and the station was tense and silent. The next, there was a deep metallic groan, as something large and powerful forced the external airlock, and the doors came open with a hiss of pressurized air. Hana was already in position. She stood alone in the main corridor leading from the docking bay. By choice, she had placed her soldiers in covered positions deeper in the station, out of sight, with clear lines of fire, and orders to hold unless she gave the word. She wanted to be the first thing the Krovans saw when they came through. She wanted them to see one human, standing still, not running, not raising a weapon, not shaking. Just standing. The first Krovan soldier came through the airlock, and stopped when it saw her. It was enormous, nearly 2.5 meters tall, wrapped in dark armored plating, holding a weapon that looked like it could punch through the station wall. Behind it came more, 7, 8, 9 soldiers, filling the corridor with their bulk, their armor, their size. And behind them came the one who was clearly in charge. He was slightly taller than the others, his armor marked with symbols Hana did not recognize, but understood the meaning of: rank, authority, experience. He walked through his soldiers slowly, stopped at the front, and looked at her. His small black eyes moved over her from head to foot, taking in her size, her species, her stillness. He said something in Krovan, a low, grinding sentence, spoken with the kind of casual confidence that came from a being who had never once been told no and meant it. Hana did not understand the words, but she understood the tone perfectly. She met his eyes and said nothing. The corridor was very quiet, and the Krovan commander, whose name was Drak, felt, for the first time in a very long time, something he could not immediately name. He threw a grenade to frighten her. She kicked it back and said, "Nice try." Drak had not become a commander by being careless. He had earned his rank through 30 years of campaigns across 6 star systems, through battles that had broken lesser soldiers, and through negotiations that were really just a polite way of saying, "Surrender, or we will take it anyway." He had stood in front of warlords, planetary governors, alien military officers of a dozen different species, and he had watched every single one of them react the same way when he walked into a room in full armor with his soldiers behind him. They flinched. Not always a big flinch. Sometimes it was just a small thing, a shift in posture, a tightening of the jaw, A breath held too long, but it was always there. Because that was the natural response to looking at a Krovan warrior up close for the first time. Their size, their armor, their weaponry, all of it was designed over centuries to communicate one simple message to every other species in the galaxy. You should be afraid of us. So when Drak walked through the airlock of Veltara Station and saw the human female standing alone in the corridor, he was ready for the flinch. He was patient about it. He walked slowly, let his armor catch the light, let the sound of his boots and his soldier's boots fill the metal corridor with noise and weight and presence. He stopped in front of her and looked down, and she was, by Krovan standards, extremely small, and he spoke the traditional opening line that his species used at first contact with a hostile installation. This station is now under Krovan authority. Your resistance is unnecessary and will be punished. Your cooperation will be noted. The human did not flinch. She looked up at him with brown eyes that were completely, almost insultingly calm, and said nothing. Drak blinked. He had not expected silence. He had expected fear, or shouting, or the kind of trembling bravery that came with saying something defiant, while clearly terrified. He could work with all of those things. They were familiar. They fit the pattern. Silence did not fit the pattern. He tried again, louder this time. She still said nothing. Her expression did not change. She was just looking at him. The way someone looks at a door they are deciding whether to open or not. Measuring. Unhurried. Behind him, his second-in-command, a solid, experienced soldier named Oren, leaned close and said very quietly, "She's not afraid, Commander." "I can see that," Drak said, keeping his voice level. "Should we proceed to the demonstration?" The demonstration was what the Krovan military called the second step in a standard boarding operation. Step 1 was the presence, walking in with numbers and armor, and letting the other side feel the weight of what they were dealing with. Step 2 was the demonstration, a targeted act designed not to harm, but to shock. Something that would make it real to the defending force that the Krovans were not there to negotiate, and were not concerned about the well-being of anyone in the station who chose not to cooperate. It almost always worked. Drak reached to his belt and unclipped a concussion grenade. It was a Krovan model, slightly larger than the human versions, cased in dull black metal, with a short fuse set to detonate 4 seconds after the pin was pulled. It was not designed to kill in open spaces, but it was loud, it was violent in its pressure wave, and it had a way of reminding people very clearly that the beings standing in front of them were not joking. He pulled the pin. He looked at the human standing in front of him, and he rolled the grenade, casually, almost lazily, along the floor toward her feet. The corridor went very still. His 9 soldiers all took a small step back, more from habit than fear, because even Krovan soldiers gave a concussion grenade its space. The grenade rolled in a slow, straight line across the metal floor, spinning slightly, coming to rest almost exactly at the toe of the human's left boot. 4 seconds. Drak watched her face. Nothing happened in it. No fear, no panic. She looked down at the grenade at her feet, the way a person looks at something mildly inconvenient that has rolled under their chair. A pen, a coin, a small object that needs to be dealt with, but is not cause for alarm. Then she moved. It was not a scramble. It was not a dive to the side, or a sprint backward, or any of the responses Drak had seen from other species when a grenade was placed at their feet. It was one smooth, practiced motion. Her right foot came back slightly, her weight shifted, and then her left boot connected with the side of the grenade in a clean, hard side kick. The kind of kick that carried full body weight behind it, and the grenade left the floor and skidded fast back down the corridor. It went between Drak's legs. It detonated 2 meters behind him. The pressure wave hit every Krovan soldier in the corridor at the same time. It was not lethal. It was never lethal in open space. That was the point. It hit like a wall of compressed air moving at speed, and every one of Drax's soldiers staggered. 2 of them went down to one knee. Orin was knocked sideways into the corridor wall, hard enough that his helmet rang. Drax himself took a full step forward from the force of it, his ears screaming, his vision briefly white at the edges. He caught himself, straightened, turned around to check his soldiers. They were shaken, disoriented, pulling themselves back to their feet with the slightly stunned movements of people who had just been hit by something they had not expected to be hit by. Then he turned back to the human. She was standing in exactly the same spot, same posture, same expression. She had not moved a centimeter from where she had been before the grenade went off. The only difference was that now she was looking at him with something that was not quite a smile, but was sitting right next to one. "Nice try," she said. Not aggressive. Not gloating. Just accurate. The corridor was very silent for a long moment. Drax became aware that his soldiers were looking at him. All 9 of them, including Orin, who had a new dent in his helmet and a slightly glassy look in his eyes. They were waiting to see how their commander responded to what had just happened, because what had just happened did not have a section in the standard operating manual. The manual assumed the grenade worked. The manual assumed the demonstration produced the fear response, and from there the target was manageable. The manual had nothing to say about the grenade coming back. Drax straightened to his full height. His ears were still ringing. He kept his face absolutely still, because showing reaction in front of his soldiers was not something he was willing to do, not even after something like this. "What is your name?" he asked the human. He made his voice as flat and official as he could. She looked at him for a moment. "Hana," she said. "Lieutenant Hana, United Earth Defense Corps." "Lieutenant Hana," he repeated. "You understand what position you are in?" "Yes," she said. "And yet?" "And yet," she agreed, with a tone that made it sound like she was finishing his sentence for him, and not particularly concerned about where it ended. Drax looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his soldiers, and he looked back at her. He made a decision. Not the one the manual called for. Something different. Something that came not from training, but from the part of his mind that had kept him alive through 30 years of hard campaigns. The part that knew when a situation had changed, and when the original plan no longer applied. "Fall back," he said quietly to Orin. Orin turned to look at him. "Commander?" "Take the soldiers back to the airlock. Hold there." Orin stared. Then, because he was a good soldier, and Drax was his commanding officer, he nodded once, and began moving the troops back down the corridor. Drax stayed where he was. He and Hana stood in the corridor alone, 15 feet apart, and the air between them was full of the faint smell of the grenade discharge, and something else, something harder to name. "You knew it was a concussion grenade," Drax said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Hana said. "How?" Drax asked. "The casing, the fuse length, the way you rolled it, relaxed, not urgent. You weren't trying to kill me. You were trying to make me run." Drax looked at her. "And if you had been wrong about what kind of grenade it was?" Hana was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Then I would have been wrong," she said. Drax had no answer for that. He stood there in the flickering corridor light of Veltara Station, 9 of his soldiers standing confused and bruised behind him, and looked at this small human woman who had just kicked his grenade back at him and was now discussing the logic of the decision like it was a training exercise. He felt something unfamiliar move through him. Not fear. Drax did not feel fear in the way other species did, but something adjacent to it, something that started with the word unexpected and ended somewhere he had not yet arrived at. He filed it away. There would be time to understand it later. He threw a grenade to frighten her. She kicked it back and said, Nice try. Oren had served under Commander Drac for 11 years. He had seen Drac walk into burning ships. He had seen Drac negotiate with warlords who had 3 times his firepower and come out with everything he went in for. He had seen Drac take a blade to the shoulder in a close-quarters fight on a moon called Veth, and finish the battle before he let anyone look at the wound. In 11 years, Oren had never once seen Drac retreat from anything. So when Drac ordered the squad back to the airlock, Oren obeyed without question, because that was what a good soldier did. But his mind was working hard the entire way down the corridor. The squad gathered near the airlock in silence. 9 Krovan soldiers in full armor, standing in a loose group, none of them quite looking at each other. One was pressing his forearm against the wall of the corridor and breathing slowly. The concussion wave had rattled all of them, but more than the physical effect, there was something else sitting on the group, a feeling that none of them had a name for, because they had never felt it in the field before. Private Boru, the youngest soldier in the squad, finally said what everyone was thinking. She kicked it back. Nobody responded at first. Then another soldier, a big veteran named Vask, said quietly, "I saw it. I was watching her face the whole time," Boru said. She didn't even look worried. She just looked at it like it was something she needed to deal with. "Stop talking," said Oren. Boru stopped, but the silence that followed was loud in its own way, full of the things no one was saying out loud. Oren looked back down the corridor toward where Drac and the human lieutenant were still standing. He could see them from here. 2 shapes in the flickering corridor light, one large and armored, one small and still. They appeared to be talking. That was another thing that didn't fit the manual. After a demonstration, there was no talking. There was surrender, or there was escalation. Those were the 2 options the manual provided. Talking was not one of them. Oren turned back to his squad. He kept his voice low and even, because a squad leader who let his tone carry his feelings was a squad leader who lost control of the room. "Listen to me," he said. "We are in a non-standard situation. The commander is handling it. Our job right now is to hold position and wait. That is all." Boru nodded. Vask nodded. The others followed. But in his own mind, Oren was doing what he had done his entire career, taking in information, updating his picture of the situation, adjusting. And the picture he was building was an uncomfortable one. He had reviewed the human military database files before this mission. All Krovan commanders did before entering a new species territory. The files were informative, but in Oren's professional assessment, somewhat dry. They listed human physical specs, height, weight, strength limits, speed ranges, and they were unimpressive by Krovan standards. They listed human weapons technology, which was genuinely capable, but not ahead of Krovan equivalents. They noted that humans had a relatively short history as a spacefaring species, less than 200 years since they had first left their solar system, which made them practically newborns compared to the Krovans. All of that was in the file. All of that was useful. What the file had not prepared him for was the thing Oren had seen in the corridor 30 minutes ago. The thing that was not about physical specs, or weapons technology, or the length of a species' history in space. The thing that lived in the way Lieutenant Hana had looked at a grenade rolling toward her feet and not run. He pulled up the secondary database on his arm unit, the one that contained field notes collected from Krovan units that had previously encountered humans in minor skirmishes along the outer boundaries. He had read these before, but he looked at them again now with different eyes. Subject displayed no retreat behavior when outnumbered 3-1. Subject maintained composure under sustained weapons fire. Subject continued fighting at approximately 60% physical capacity following injury. Recommended reclassification from Class 2 resistance to Class 4. Oren stared at that last line. Class 4 was the classification the Krovan military used for species that could not be reliably intimidated into compliance, and would require sustained force operations to subdue. In the entire history of Krovan expansion, only 2 species had ever been rated Class 4. One of them had fought the Krovans to a complete standstill, and eventually negotiated a border treaty that stood to this day. The other had taken 11 years and 4 full Krovan fleets to bring under even partial control, and the Krovan military still did not like to talk about those 11 years in polite company. Both of those species were physically massive. Both had natural armor equivalent to mid-grade plating. Both had biological advantages that made them, in simple terms, hard to kill. Humans had none of those things. Humans were small. Humans were soft. Humans had no natural armor. A Krovan soldier could, in theory, break a human's spine with his bare hands without much effort. And yet, Oren thought about Lieutenant Hana standing alone in that corridor. He thought about the way she had not taken one step backward when 9 armed Krovan soldiers had walked off that ship. He thought about the grenade and the kick, and the 2 words she had said after, "Nice try." Words Oren had run through the translation matrix twice, because he had wanted to be sure he understood them correctly. He understood them correctly. The sound of heavy boots brought him back. Drac was walking down the corridor toward them, alone. His expression was the flat, closed look he wore when he was processing something he had not fully worked out yet. Oren had learned to read that look over 11 years. The squad straightened automatically. Drac stopped in front of them. He looked at each of their faces for a brief moment. Then he said, "We are going to change approach." No one spoke. "The intimidation model does not apply here," Drac said. His voice was level and professional. No embarrassment in it, no defensiveness. Just a commander updating his assessment in real time. These people are not going to break under a show of force. Pushing harder in that direction will produce a firefight in a closed metal corridor, which favors the defenders. We have 7 ships and superior numbers, but this station has 18 personnel who are apparently not afraid to die, and a lieutenant who kicks grenades. A beat of silence. Boru made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. He immediately looked like he wished he hadn't. Drac looked at him. "Something to add, Private?" "No, Commander," Boru said, very quickly. "Good." Drac looked back at the group. "Here is what we're going to do. We're going to stand down from aggressive posture. Weapons on safety. Armor stays on, we are not idiots. But no weapons raised. I am going to go back into this station, and I am going to talk to Lieutenant Hana without a grenade in my hand. Is that understood?" Oren looked at his commander carefully. "Understood. And the mission objective?" "The mission objective is under review." Another silence, this one longer. "Under review," Oren repeated, very carefully. "This station is at the edge of charted space," Drac said. "It is a monitoring outpost. It poses no military threat to Krovan operations. We came here because Standard Expansion Protocol says we secure border installations. But Standard Expansion Protocol was written for species that do not kick grenades back." He paused. "I am questioning whether securing this particular installation by force is worth what it will cost us." Oren thought about that. He thought about the Class 4 notation in the database. He thought about the 11 years and the 4 fleets and the border treaty. "Understood, Commander," he said. And this time, he meant it completely. Back in the corridor, Lieutenant Hana had not moved. She was standing where Drac had left her, her rifle at her side. When she heard boots approaching from the direction of the airlock, she turned her head slightly. Drac was walking back alone, no squad behind him. His hands were visible and away from his weapons. Hana watched him come. She did not relax. Relaxing was not something she allowed herself in active situations. But she adjusted her read of him. She had been watching him for the last 30 minutes and building a picture. He was intelligent. He was disciplined. He was proud in the way of someone who had earned their position through real experience, not just rank. And in the last 30 minutes, he had done something that in Hana's experience, a lot of people, human or otherwise, found very difficult. He had looked at a situation that wasn't going the way he planned, and he had stopped. He had not doubled down. He had not escalated out of pride. He had pulled his soldiers back, and he had stood there, and he had thought about it. That told her something. Drax stopped 6 feet away from her. Closer than before. More like a conversation distance than a confrontation distance. "I would like to speak with you," he said. Hana looked at him. "You're already speaking with me." The corner of Drax's wide mouth moved. It was a very small movement. Hana filed it away as the Krovan equivalent of a wry smile. "I would like to speak with you without the grenade between us," he said. "The grenade is gone," Hana pointed out. "You sent it back when I kicked it." Another small movement at the corner of his mouth. Figuratively. Hana considered him for a moment. Then she said, "All right, come with me." She turned and walked down the corridor. And in the flickering light of Veltara Station, something shifted, quietly, without ceremony, from one kind of moment into a different kind entirely. He threw a grenade to frighten her. She kicked it back and said, "Nice try." The station's small meeting room was not built for a being of Drax's size. The table was the right height for a human, which meant it hit Drax somewhere around the lower half of his ribcage. The chair Hana pulled out for him groaned when he sat in it, and leaned at a slight angle, one of its legs having been bent at some point in the station's history and never fully repaired. The ceiling, while technically high enough that he didn't have to duck, gave him about 4 centimeters of clearance, which he was aware of in the way a tall person is always aware of low ceilings, constantly and with mild irritation. He sat in it anyway. He did not complain about it. Hana sat across from him. Between them on the table was a standard-issue metal canteen. 2 cups, both human-sized, which she acknowledged with a brief, practical remark, and a small translator unit that Hana had retrieved from the command deck on the way. She set it between them and activated it. The soft green light on its top face indicated it was running. "The translation will have a short delay," she said, "and it may not get everything right. If I say something that doesn't make sense, tell me." Drax looked at the translator unit. "We have something similar," he said. His words came out in Krovan, and the unit rendered them into flat but functional human language after a second. "Ours is larger." "Everything about you is larger," Hana said. Drax looked at her. That was a joke. It was an observation, she said, but yes, also a joke. Then he said, "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Drax thought about it honestly. Fear, or defiance built on top of fear. The kind where someone says something brave, but their hands are shaking. "I have seen both many times. I know how to work with both." He paused. "You had neither." Hana poured water into both cups and pushed one toward him. He looked at it for a moment. The gesture was not a Krovan custom, but he understood what it meant well enough, and picked it up. He had to be careful with the cup, because it was very small in his hand, but he managed it without breaking it. "I have been in enough situations to know that fear doesn't help," Hana said. "It makes you slower. It makes you make mistakes. So I trained it out." "You cannot train fear out," Drax said. "We tried that with our soldiers centuries ago. The result was soldiers who made poor decisions because they had removed the part of themselves that calculated risk accurately." Hana shook her head slightly. "I didn't say I don't feel it. I said I trained it out of my decision-making. I felt it when I saw your ships on the sensor screen. I felt it when your soldiers came off that airlock. But I didn't let it make my decisions." Drax turned his cup in his hands, carefully, and looked at her. "There is a difference?" "A very large one," she said. He considered that. It was not a Krovan way of thinking about fear. But as he turned it over, he found that it had a shape that made sense. The Krovan approach had always been to find soldiers for whom fear was naturally minimal, a personality trait, a biological tendency. The idea of feeling fear and then simply not allowing it into the decision loop was something else. Something that sounded, if he was being precise, like an enormous amount of work done over a very long time. "The grenade," he said. Hana met his eyes. "I want to understand that," Drax said. "Not as a military exercise. I want to understand what happened in your mind in that moment." Hana was quiet for a few seconds. She was not uncomfortable with the question. She was just thinking about how to answer it accurately. "I saw the grenade come toward me," she said. "My first read was that it was a concussion type. The casing, the way you rolled it, the lack of urgency in the movement. If you had wanted to kill me, you would have thrown it hard at my chest, not rolled it at my feet. So I calculated. Probably concussion grenade, probably being used to scare me, probably 4-second fuse based on the standard design." She paused. "Then I thought, if I run, you win. Not just that situation, the whole dynamic. Every conversation we have after that, you think you can roll something at my feet, and I'll move. So I didn't run." Drac was still. "And if you had been wrong about the grenade type?" he asked. "You asked me that before," she said. "I am asking again." Hana looked at him steadily. "If I was wrong, I was wrong. But I wasn't." Drac set his cup down on the table. He looked at his hands for a moment, wide, four-fingered, scarred in places from old fights. And then he looked up at the human woman sitting across from him, in a small broken chair, in a cold room, on the edge of nowhere. "I have fought 17 species," he said. "I have boarded 14 installations. I have used the demonstration 43 times. He paused. "It has never come back before." Hana did not say anything. "I want to ask you a direct question," he said. "And I want you to give me a direct answer. All right? If I escalate, if I bring my soldiers back in, and we take this station by force, what happens?" Hana thought about it without any visible emotion. "People die. Probably most of mine, because you have 9 soldiers to my 12, and you're physically stronger in close quarters. Maybe some of yours, because my people are well trained, and they know this station, and they will not go easily." She paused. "Then you had a station you took by force on the edge of space, and Earth Command gets the report, and the United Earth Defense Corps classifies Krovan forces as a hostile actor, and the next time your ships come anywhere near human-claimed space, there are a lot more than 18 people waiting for you." Drac was quiet. "And if you don't escalate?" he asked. "Then we're 2 people sitting in a small room, drinking water out of cups that are too small for one of us," Hana said. "And we figure out whether there is a version of this that doesn't end with anyone dead." "You think there is?" Hana looked at him carefully. "You pulled your soldiers back. You came here alone, without your weapon raised. You're sitting in a chair that is obviously uncomfortable for you, and you haven't mentioned it once." She paused. "Those are not the actions of someone who has already decided to fight." Drac looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he said, "My orders were to secure this installation. Take it under Krovan authority. Standard border expansion protocol." "I know," Hana said. "Those orders came from the High Command. I know that too. I cannot simply choose not to follow them because one human woman kicked my grenade back." Hana almost smiled. "Can't you?" Another silence. It was a different kind of silence than the ones in the corridor. More like the kind of silence that happens when a person is actually thinking, rather than just waiting to speak. "What are you proposing?" Drac asked. "I'm not proposing anything yet," Hana said. "I'm asking you to tell me what you actually want. Not what your orders say. What you, Drac, Commander, 30 years in the Krovan military, actually want from this situation." He stared at her. No one had ever asked him that in a field operation. Not once in 30 years. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his hands again. Then very quietly he said, "I want to go home." Hana looked at him. "I have been on campaign for 3 years," he said. "Continuous operations. My family is on the homeworld. My youngest son was 11 when I left. He is 14 now. I have not seen him in 3 years." He paused. "I have 17 more installations on my orders. After this one, 17 more. And every one of them will be the same thing. Arrive, demonstrate, take control, move on." He looked up at her. "I do not know what I am building anymore." The room was very quiet. Hana refilled his cup. He watched her do it. "Tell me something," she said. "What happens if you go back to your high command, and you tell them this station is not a security risk and not worth taking? That it's a scientific monitoring post on the edge of nothing, staffed by 18 people, and holding it would cost more than it gains? They will ask why I didn't take it," Drax said. "And you'll tell them the truth," Hana said. "That the tactical situation was unfavorable, and you made a command decision." Drax looked at her. "You are very good at this." "At what?" "At making difficult things sound simple." Hana shook her head. "I'm not making it simple. You have real orders, and I have real people on this station, and neither of us is going to pretend otherwise." She looked at him directly. "But you're not actually here to take a monitoring station from 18 scientists and soldiers. You're here because a protocol says you should. And protocols exist to serve outcomes, not the other way around." Drax was quiet for a very long time. Outside the room, the station hummed its usual hum. Somewhere in the ventilation system, the heating unit clicked and groaned and went quiet. The fluorescent light above them flickered twice, steadied. Finally, Drax said, "If I leave this station unsecured, and your people report this contact to Earth Command, it is possible that this location becomes a military focus. That they send more people, more weapons, specifically because a Krovan boarding party came and left. I can't stop that. So your side escalates regardless. My side files a report. What your high command does with it is up to your high command." She paused. "But I can tell you what I will put in my report." Drax looked at her. "I will write that a Krovan boarding commander assessed the tactical situation, recognized that force was not the appropriate response, and withdrew his forces without casualties on either side." She paused. "And I will note that said commander was the most honest conversation I have had out here in 7 months." Drax stared at her for a moment. Then he stood up from the small broken chair, slowly, to his full height. The ceiling gave him 4 centimeters. He looked down at Hana, who had also stood, and who came up to approximately the middle of his chest. He put his right fist against his left shoulder, a Krovan gesture that his translator unit rendered as "acknowledged with respect." Hana looked at his fist against his shoulder. Then she extended her right hand, palm flat, fingers together. Drax looked at it. He had read about human handshakes in the database. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, because his hand was 4 times the size of hers, and moved it once, up and down. "My son's name is Dorvak," he said. "He wants to study engineering, not the military." Hana looked up at him. "That sounds like a good plan." "Yes," Drax said quietly. He threw a grenade to frighten her. She kicked it back and said, "Nice try." The Krovan ships left Beltara Station at 1400 hours. There was no ceremony to it, no formal goodbye, no signals exchanged, no flags lowered or raised. The airlock that had been forced open earlier was sealed back shut. Drax had sent 2 of his soldiers to repair the mechanism before they left, which Hana noted in her report as a detail she thought Earth Command would find interesting. 7 dark angular ships disengaged from the station's outer structure, moved out in formation past the second dead moon, and disappeared into the dark. Private Tay watched them go from the sensor station. He tracked them for 40 minutes, until they jumped to FTL and vanished from the display. Then he sat very still for a moment, staring at the empty screen, and let out a long, slow breath. "They're gone," he said. She had been watching the sensor display too, though not because she was worried. She had known Drac would leave from the moment he pulled his soldiers back to the airlock. The conversation in the meeting room had confirmed it, but the knowledge had come before that. It had come from watching how he moved, how he spoke, how he had stood in that corridor after the grenade came back and not immediately reached for a weapon. "Log the departure time," she said. "Full sensor record, all 7 ships, full incident timeline. I want it ready to transmit to Earth Command within the hour." "Yes, Lieutenant," Tay said. Hana walked back down the main corridor. She passed the spot where she had stood when the Krovans came through the airlock. The floor still had a faint scorch mark from the grenade detonation behind where Drac's soldiers had been standing. She looked at it for a moment, then kept walking. Private Bomi was in the corridor outside the meeting room. She had been debriefed, along with the rest of the defense personnel, but she had waited afterward, standing in the corridor with her arms crossed, in the way she did when she had a question she wasn't sure how to ask. Hana stopped when she reached her. "Go ahead." Bomi looked at her. "I've been going over the sensor logs from when they docked. There were 9 of them, armed, full armor, and you went and stood in that corridor alone." "Yes," Hana said. "Why alone?" "Because if they saw a line of soldiers pointing weapons at them the moment they came through the door, someone would have started shooting," Hana said. "One person standing still is harder to respond to than a firing line. It changes what the situation looks like." Bomi thought about that. "And the grenade?" Hana looked at her. "What about it? When it came toward you, were you scared?" The heating unit clicked somewhere in the walls. "Yes," Hana said. Bomi blinked. "You didn't look it." "That's the goal," Hana said simply. She moved past Bomi toward the command deck, then paused and looked back. "You did well today. Everyone did. Get some rest. Full debrief at 0800 tomorrow." Bomi nodded. Then, almost to herself, she said, she kicked the grenade back and said, "Nice try." Hana did not respond to that, but as she walked away, there was something in the set of her shoulders that might, if you were watching carefully, have been the posture of a person who was allowing herself, very briefly and privately, to find something funny. The incident report that Hana filed with Earth Command was 5 pages long, precise and professional. It documented the arrival of the Krovan vessels, the forced boarding, the confrontation in the corridor, the conversation with Commander Drac. It included full sensor logs, time-stamped and verified. It used neutral language throughout, and made no dramatic claims. It reached Earth Command 14 hours after transmission. Within 6 hours of its arrival, it had been read by 47 different officials across 3 departments. Within 12 hours, it had been forwarded to the Joint Military Council. Within 24 hours, a senior analyst in the Department of Alien Relations had written a 7-page commentary on it that began with the words, "This report should be required reading for every officer in the Corps." The detail that everyone kept returning to was not the strategic outcome. It was not the fact that Drac had chosen to withdraw rather than escalate, which was genuinely significant from a diplomatic standpoint. It was not even the conversation in the meeting room, which the Department of Alien Relations found fascinating and immediately began analyzing for cultural implications. It was the grenade. The image of Lieutenant Hana kicking a Krovan concussion grenade back to the soldiers who had thrown it, while outnumbered, alone, in a narrow metal corridor with no backup visible, circulated through Earth Command like something with a life of its own. People forwarded it not because they were ordered to, but because they could not stop thinking about it. Military officers forwarded it to their junior staff with short notes that said things like, "This is what composure under pressure looks like," and "Read the footnotes on this one." an instructor at the military academy in Seoul, put it into a leadership seminar 2 weeks after the report was filed, and later said that it produced the most engaged discussion of the entire year. In the outer stations and the far-range posts, the places where small groups of people sat in old metal buildings at the edge of known space and watched the dark, and filed reports that usually said nothing to report. The story moved differently. It moved the way stories move in isolated places among people who understand what it actually means to stand in a corridor alone and wait for whatever is coming through the airlock. It moved fast, and it moved far, and it grew slightly in the telling, as all good stories do, but the core of it stayed intact. A Krovan boarding commander rolled a grenade at a human lieutenant's feet. She kicked it back. She said, "Nice try." He left. On the Krovan side, the story traveled differently, but just as far. Drac filed his own report with the High Command. It was longer than Hana's. Krovan military reports had different formatting requirements, and it contained a full account of events, including his assessment of the tactical situation, his reasoning for choosing withdrawal over engagement, and a detailed analysis of human behavioral patterns as observed during the confrontation. It was, by Krovan military standards, an unusual document. Most boarding reports were brief, secured. 3 verbs, a timestamp, a list of resources taken. Drac's report was 40 pages. The High Command read it. They were not immediately pleased. 40 pages where 3 verbs should have been was not a good sign. And the word "withdrew" in the outcome column was not a word that appeared often in Krovan boarding operation records. There were discussions. There were 3 separate reviews. There was a period of about 2 weeks during which Drac stood in front of different panels and answered questions and laid out his reasoning with the same flat professionalism he had used in his report. The outcome of those reviews was not what many expected. The High Command did not reprimand him. What they did was more unusual. They commissioned a supplementary intelligence report on human resistance patterns. They assigned 2 analysts full-time to reviewing every prior Krovan interaction with human forces. They quietly revised the recommended approach protocol for human-held installations, from standard boarding procedure to assess before engaging. And one very senior member of the High Command, old enough to have been part of the border treaty with the Class 4 species 40 years ago, requested a private meeting with Drac and asked him in detail to describe the human lieutenant's face when the grenade rolled toward her feet. Drac described it. The senior commander was quiet for a long time after. Then he said, "And she just kicked it." "Yes," Drac said, and said, "Nice try." "Yes." The senior commander looked at the wall for a moment. "That is either the most dangerous species we have ever met," he said, "or the most interesting." "I do not think those are separate things," Drac said. The senior commander looked at him. Then he nodded, slowly, in a way that meant the meeting was over. Private Boru told the story best. He was not a natural storyteller. He was quiet, careful, more likely to listen than to speak. But he had been in that corridor. He had been one of the soldiers standing behind Drac when the grenade rolled back. He had felt the pressure wave hit him and knocked him sideways into the wall, and wrung his armor. And he had seen Hana's face in the moment after, when the air was still full of the smell of the discharge, and his ears were still screaming. He told the story for the first time 3 weeks after returning from the mission, sitting in a mess hall on a Krovan carrier, with 6 other soldiers who had not been there and could not stop asking questions. He told it slowly, carefully, getting every detail right. He did not need to. When he got to the part where the grenade came back, the table went very quiet. When he got to the part where she said, "Nice try," one of the soldiers exhaled slowly through his teeth and said, "She said it like that? Quietly?" "Quietly," Boru confirmed, like she was commenting on the weather. Another soldier shook his head. "What kind of species does that?" Boru thought about it for a moment. He thought about what Oren had said in the corridor after the squad pulled back. The thing about the database classification, about the 2 Class 4 species, about the 11 years and the 4 fleets. He thought about the small human woman standing alone in the corridor, with her rifle at her side and her expression completely still. A species that has decided to be that kind of species, he said finally. No one had a response to that. 7 months after the incident, Hana received a personal transmission at Veltara Station. It came through the standard diplomatic relay, addressed to her by name and rank. When she opened it, it was short. It said, "My son has been accepted to the Engineering Institute on the homeworld. I wanted you to know, Drac." Hana read it twice, then she sat down and wrote back. "Congratulations to your family. That is good news. Hana, Lieutenant, UEDC, Veltara Station." She sent it. Then she picked up her coffee, black, no sugar, and walked to the small observation window at the end of the command deck, and looked out at the stars. The second dead moon hung in the dark, to the left. The lights inside the station flickered, once, and steadied. The heating unit in the wall groaned, clicked, and went quiet. Nothing to report, except everything.